and welcome to In the Margins. Today, we're so pleased to have as our guest Dr. Kimberly Greene, who is Professor of Education and Chair of the Master of Arts in Education program at the University of Massachusetts Global School of Education. Dr. Greene, thank you so very much for joining us here for In the Margins. My first question for you, Dr. Greene, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your background in teaching, your background in teacher education, and what are your passions around education? I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about your background.
Oh, goodness. How long is this podcast? Thank you. First of all, thank you, David. I appreciate this invitation to chat so very much. So I make no bones about it. I Forrest Gumped my way into education. And I was not that kid that grew up, putting the dollies in line and teaching them all the ABCs, not in any way. I tripped into the whole educational world through the arts. I grew up engaging in theater and all kinds of play in that world. And when I, quote unquote, became an adult, I was asked to, help with some summer classes, teaching kids, little bunnies, how to basic ballet and basic theater games, and was stunned to find that it was the engagement with the kids that I was most jazzed about, as opposed to the artistic end of it, which initially is what brought me there. So I also want to say I was primarily raised by my father, who thought Radio Shack was, the greatest thing ever on this earth. So I was always with wires and electrical plugs and playing with things. And he was my role model. So there was never any of that issue that many young women have, where they see anything technology or engineering oriented being, that's a male purview. That was my role model. So I grew up splicing wires, and I was the girl on the AV team and all that fun stuff. And as I found myself enjoying the teaching process more and more, this was when EdTech first started becoming a thing. And I still have a collection of Apple IIe's, and I have a quote unquote portable computer that is the size of a small Buick that I used to drag from class to class more than a few years ago. So this melding of education and technology came very natural for me. And when I was getting my teaching credential, which again, I still didn't really see myself as a teacher. I was someone who, I'm enjoying this, and my friends are all getting teaching credentials. And while I'm still doing artistic stuff on the side, maybe this will be interesting as well. I fell in with a professor who was doing all this crazy experimental stuff with educational technology and HyperCard. And there's this new language called HTML. Let's learn this and see what we can play with. And that little bit of an entree into a Wild West kind of environment was so exciting. And then turning around and being able to teach other people this crazy new way of thinking of sharing ideas and communicating, that really sparked something for me. And it also helped me to craft this vision of education, not as a canon of set static things that everyone must know to move forward, but instead, education became synonymous with exploration and innovation. And that very much defines my career, my focus, everything I do moving forward. I'm always approaching learning something from a very personal examination, exploration, creativity. how can we really make this meaningful as well as innovative? Not about repetition, about building upon those who have come before us and what they've given us so we can take stuff that much more forward and see what else is possible. And that's how I ended up, again, accidentally, with a doctorate in educational technology before that was really a thing. There were no jobs for people with that degree because nobody knew what it was. This was right around the year 2000. And so I printed up some business cards with a made up business name and said, "Hey, I'm a consultant," put on a jacket, looked all grown up and, professional, and started going to conferences. Ended up at one particular conference, meeting some people who were working for Michael Milken when he was crafting Knowledge Universe. And that idea was very much in parallel with where I was coming from. Reaching out, helping people examine what they thought they knew, what they wanted to know, and then going beyond, using technology as an extension of your ability to build and communicate and explore and do. And so after a couple of years of working with them, which I very much enjoyed, I kind of tripped my way back into academia and have ever since been building out programs and helping people as best I could to go beyond any preconceived notion of, well, this is what it means to be a teacher, trying to make it so that it's more personal and empowering for the individual and all those the individual serves. That's been a pretty consistent thread.
When we talk about the teaching profession and, something that has been a concern for many over many years is diversity. Obviously, in many school districts around the country, the student diversity is vast, right? You have students, especially as this country becomes more diverse. The classrooms are being more diverse when it comes to the students. But of course, as you know, efforts to diversify the teaching profession have been unsuccessful in many places. Even teaching recruits that come in who are diverse, because of the dynamics of the profession, because of other opportunities, retaining them is a problem. I was wondering if you could talk about this teaching diversity issue. Many have tried and failed. There have been some successes. There are some programs around the country that are having some success. Some programs, for instance, are targeting African-American males, right? Because we have a male issue as well, right? Mm-hmm. We know the benefits, and of course, you've seen the benefits of, for instance, male teachers and how male students might actually gain from that, from seeing that face, seeing somebody like them. Mm-hmm. Teaching them, So I was wondering if you could talk about this whole teaching diversity issue. What is the problem from your perspective in terms of having the teaching workforce match the student diversity profile? What is the issue and what is the solution in your perspective? I want to just get your thoughts on that.
So much of the issue comes from our unspoken cultural beliefs because of what we've experienced. And I don't want this to sound like we're turning into a therapy session, because we're not. But what so many of us, the thing that makes us a great learner when you're an adult is you bring your experience with you. You get to build on it. One of the things that can truly hold us back is our experience, that we're not able to step back and recognize just because it's what we lived at the time doesn't mean that it was either the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, or the way things need to be going forward. Education is so challenging to try and have these very kinds of conversations. I'm thrilled that we're having it because everybody takes their education so personally. And there's always that unspoken image way back in your mind where, despite someone today explaining that the world is different and that we need this and we need that and these opportunities. And at the time it was just a moment in culture and blah, blah, blah. But if you still remember, school is the teacher who basically looked like every other teacher in the school, and would walk in and close that door and open the book and start reading on page 1 and then give you a test and then blah, blah, blah to the end of the year. Even as an adult, without being able to recognize that, accept it for what it was at that time, and have the courage to go, okay, that was then, but this is a new day and I'm going to change it. You'll never fully get past that as kind of an anvil or a rope holding you back. A lot of individuals that I speak with in our teacher credentialing program, they will say the same story over and over again, that they're a person of color or a different religion or something, language, whatever. They were the outsider. They didn't connect with the teacher who was in the classroom. They weren't looking or sounding the same as every other kid in the classroom. And even though they wanted to learn, they never quite felt welcome. And they had to work so hard to find their footing. And then as they grew up and they thought about what they wanted to do with their lives professionally, they were very hesitant to go into teaching because they still had that memory way in the back of their head that held them back. Well, I can't be a teacher. I don't look like, I didn't feel welcome back then. It's just not that thing that's right for me. And for them to be able to get around that, accept it for what it was, and take that step forward and say, okay, but this is who I am. There's a place for me. And I want to be someone who can reach out to all the learners so no one has that same experience that I had. That takes a lot of courage. And I don't think we speak openly enough about it because on one hand, it seems almost juvenile. Oh yeah, this experience I had as a kid, it colored me so much that now as a 28-year-old, it's holding me back. People can be embarrassed by that. Or they may not even recognize that that's part of that little voice in their head that's going, no, find something else. That's not for you. So a lot of the people of color, and again, different religions, language, whatever, that I work with directly in teacher pre-service, they have a parallel story. And sometimes it's when we do, I'm a huge John Dewey fan. Oh, all of my students are like, we're journaling, relax, we're journaling. It's in that kind of work where you're making connections to be able to move forward that they have those literal epiphanies. Wow, I never realized that I had such a negative view of mathematics until I really stepped back and remembered this experience in 4th grade where the math specialist, blah, 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 blah. So that actually is a huge part of it. Additionally, continuing on with the theme of culture, if we view education through one lens, and this is where it gets really weird, through one lens, learning means this. Learning means that you get a certain number of correct answers on this test, which is based upon you replicating the thing I have shown you in the classroom. Well, that's one form of being able to demonstrate a certain form of mastery, right? That's one way of thinking of education and moving forward. But what if a different cultural perspective is applied and learning means understanding more than just knowing? Understanding, having that depth of the why and the how to a concept, to, the War of 1812, not just the dates, the names, but what were the factors that caused it? And then affording someone an opportunity to demonstrate that understanding in a modality that lets them shine. Yes, you still have to be accountable for core components so that you, as well as everyone else, are able to understand who was the president and what caused this and why did that happen and blah, blah, blah. But as opposed to simply putting on paper names, facts, dates in an isolated context, being able to craft, whether it's a presentation or some kind of verbal conversation or a multimedia project that has different labels, a way to still clarify depth of understanding that is factually correct and contains all the core components. When we look at education through that lens, that it's about understanding and being able to craft understanding as opposed to memorize a canon of knowledge, then we're opening up learning to people who, again, because of their family, their culture, their experiences, their own proclivities to ways of communication, education becomes a part of them. The learning is personal and meaningful, as opposed to feeling like it's a series of doors you have to, figure out what the skeleton key is to get through. And opening up the experience so that it is more personal, it affords that freedom to seek out representation, to seek out the people who look like you. I mentioned that when I fell into EdTech because at the graduate level, EdTech started to become a thing. What I didn't mention is a big piece of that is, for the first time, I had a professor. I had to take an experimental technology and ed class getting my credential. The professor looked like me. She was a short woman. She had frizzy hair. She actually had 2 different colored socks on, but that's a different conversation. She didn't take herself too seriously. She was full of energy and she had fun with what she was doing. And it was the first time ever I felt like, wait a minute, that person looks like me and sounds like me. And if she can do it, maybe I can too. And it literally was the first time in my entire life I felt intelligent. I'd always felt like education was this big, scary thing. And I was, kind of the imposter syndrome. I was faking my way through it.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, it became rich and meaningful. And it was something I could do. And it didn't have to be a battle. And I wasn't scared someone was going to look over my shoulder and go, oh, who let her in the room? It was fabulous. And that's why these issues of culture and opening up the experience and affording opportunities, because some of the different fields, all we have in the canon of knowledge, a lot of the authors and the theorists, they look the same, right? It's the same person in the same suit, just with a different haircut across the centuries. But that's because other people in the field who maybe look like you or look like me or sounded like us, they were excluded in the editing process. I'm not pointing any fingers. There's only so many pages you can print in a book. And if only one person is making that decision, they're most likely going to go with the name that they heard when they were growing up. It's a perpetuating system until we recognize it. So that in and of itself, to open up the culture, be open with the fact that just because what you experienced as a kid may have gotten you to this point doesn't mean that's the be all end all. So we can open it up to more people and they write the next chapter in the evolution of that future. So that's what I think is both the issue and the quote unquote solution, although there's no such thing as one solution.
I also wanted to ask you about education being politicized, right? Around issues of diversity. In many parts of the country, we are seeing laws being passed, restricting the teaching on diversity topics, banning critical race theory or banning really any teaching of any diversity topics, right? So very, very alarming to many people around the country, many educators.
Mhm.
And I wanted to ask you, to what extent is this whole politicization of education when it comes to diversity, to what extent do you think that might affect people's decision making when it says, all right, um, this is something that I want to do? I want to get your perspective on how education has become politicized around diversity of late, and what effect that might have as we are seeking to attract more diverse people into the profession.
I think it's very detrimental, dangerous when people are afraid of change. What do we tend to do? We pull back. We grip our fist that much tighter, right? We got to hold on. Again, education is so personal. So someone wants to change and teach my kid differently than the way I was taught back in 1970 something. No, that's wrong. Look how well I turned out. Education must stay the way I had it. This and I agree with you completely. There is not one shred of anything I'm going to say that in any way is arguing with what you're saying. I do believe it comes from fear. And I do believe that it's horribly detrimental to opening up the profession because it's saying, we don't trust you as a teacher. We don't trust you as a professional. We are going to train you to be on an assembly line, just like, let's go back to Ford at the beginning of the Model T, right? That was revolutionary at the time. We can build so many more cars so fast. But we're talking about dealing with human beings. We can't assembly line education. You can do that with specific broken out skills, right? Learn a particular algorithm just to solve one problem. It makes sense for little micro stuff that is replication oriented. How do I fill out my tax form? Tell me what the different things are. But when it comes to teaching, to take the humanity out of it, to reduce the entire profession to, you cannot choose a book, you must start on page 1, it's scripted, you say this, you are dehumanizing a profession that is all about building relationships to gain trust and empower people to take chances and grow and bloom. And for an individual who already, I'll say it again, in the back of their head, they have this image of an education where they didn't look like the teacher, and the teacher maybe didn't understand a lot of the terminology or the nomenclature they would use coming in from home, or the reason that they were a certain color at a certain time of year, family stuff, heritage stuff, cultural stuff. To then make that appear that it is outside of the norm so much that it must be regulated, you're creating a situation where only those people who already fit in your scripted paradigm of education are the ones that belong in that position. And you're excluding other voices, other perspectives, other strengths, other ways of thinking and doing and solving and problem solving. And yeah, that is exclusionary to anyone who doesn't look like that picture of the third grade teacher who was the buttoned up with the big boofy hairdo and the tweed skirt, and you will sit down and be quiet and fill out your worksheet. It doesn't align with that. So why in the world would you spend the money and the life force energy to go to school, to get a credential, to be put in a position where you are not, as the unique individual you are, not only not appreciated, but in essence, you're being stripped of that and told to be something else. Let's go back to my imposter syndrome. Boom, there it is in action. And that's not healthy for any individual, intellectually or, emotionally, spiritually. It's dehumanizing. How in the world, to people who already have experienced 1,000 different microaggressions just for not being the vision that is continuously, promulgated, that's expecting too much of a human being to live that continuously and have to separate their humanity from their profession to that extent in an environment where it's all based upon humanity and seeing and communicating trust.
Things have been very challenging of late in many schools. And I'm thinking of the pandemic. I'm here near Baltimore. And, for many years, of course, the talk has been about failing schools, what can be done to turn them around. Look at what's being spent per pupil, right? And there will be much debate about, all right, is the money being spent effectively? The school's not being turned around. And then, of course, with the pandemic, so many concerns have been expressed about, any progress that had been made is lost as kids were not able to even get into the classroom. My last question is a question about the times that we're in. You've mentioned how you came into EdTech. It wasn't accidental, but you have seen so much over the years when it comes to EdTech. And my last question for you, what are some of the technological tools, solutions that you believe may help to move the ball forward, maybe even make this profession more attractive to the diverse people that we all want to see join the teaching ranks? And I was wondering if you talk about this whole curriculum instruction piece as well, because, there's a lot of catch up that is happening that I see. And it seems to me that, there is an EdTech solution that many may not really see as viable. So I apologize for that long question. But my last question to you is, I was wondering if you talk a little bit about your work with EdTech and how there may be some EdTech solutions that are not being fully implemented to help draw more diverse people into the profession and help move the ball forward when it comes to turning around, quote unquote, failing school. I was wondering if you could reflect on the EdTech's role moving the ball forward on some of those issues.
The irony, the whole pandemic time, I keep referring back to quarantine teaching, because being put in this position, I don't know if you are old enough to remember a show called MASH, the mobile arm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it was where there was the mobile army surgical hospital out in the middle of a war zone, right? At the Korean War and conflict. When people think about the pandemic and the education that happened then, and the way that technology was not used, and they're using it now as an opportunity to say, see, it doesn't work. We have to go back to basics, right? It's being used as a weapon. Everybody didn't learn. What they're missing is it was the same situation as being in that hospital. You could be the best trained surgeon in the world, but when you're working out in the middle of a war zone and you only have duct tape and chewing gum to operate on, you're just doing the best you can to survive and save lives. Foreign teaching was the same type of thing because most of our teachers didn't have the proper training to be able to fully facilitate. The irony is what the stories that keep not being told are the ones about the teachers who are willing to be exploratory and build community and get their students to really look forward to that time that they were together and took advantage of the tools at the moment to modify their teaching practice and the teaching experience. Many people who were typically outside of the norm, whether, again, we're talking culture, race, ethnicity, language, teachers who were kind of didn't feel like they fit the mold in the classroom, but were still trying, they found their voice. We have really amazing communities, and that is one of the best things that technology can afford us. This opportunity to build community, because that is what empowers diversity. When you don't feel like you're alone, you're willing to stand up and make changes that you otherwise wouldn't. I'm teaching, I've got a student from this particular culture. I know nothing about this culture. I can turn to my community and go, hey, does anybody have a connection with this culture? Any authors? I'm kind of stymied here. I've got a group of people, like-minded educators, who, even if they don't individually know, they can then reach out to people in their different networks. There's a lot of negativity that comes with isolationism and fragmentation, but we're so focused on all of that right now, we're missing the opportunities for the positive connections. The irony is I mentioned that I first started consulting because there were no jobs. One of my actual first consulting gigs was that I was the web designer for a group that called themselves Black Geeks Online. And they were like, we're looking for an HTML designer. Anybody interested? We've got 15 cents to pay you for a week. I was like, you know what? It'll be my first job. I'm right here. Sign me up. That opportunity to have your safe space and share ideas and then bring new people into your environment. It's building that group so that you're able to not feel like an imposter, because you don't have to, quote unquote, lose your own humanity. It is about kind of the immigrant experience of coming into a different environment and learning the predominant language, but being able to then meld who you are and what's important to you, your language, your lingo, your way of seeing, your way of being, so that you're forming an even stronger culture. We always talk about America as a melting pot, right? Canada looks at itself as a patchwork quilt. All of the immigrants who come in, they're not expected to strip themselves of who they are. They're expected to bring who they are into and help further and build upon the Canadian culture to make it richer and more inclusive. Our school environments, using technology, again, sharing meaningful resources, helping do research to understand who all was involved in this field to get us to this point, women in different areas, people of color in different areas, different religions, different languages, so that we're opening up those stories by sharing pieces of ourselves. And also, because the technology affords us ways of demonstrating what we're learning, doing the learning differently, demonstrating it, whether you're someone who needs to write everything out to get a picture of what it is, whether you're somebody who needs to read something out loud, record yourself, and hear it. Hear your own voice saying back to you the different facts and figures, using different technologies to build mind maps and identify connections to concepts that you never would have seen before because everything was isolated on different pages of a book. Being willing to play with learning using the tools, not about the tools. It's not about the technology. It's about exploiting how different technology tools let us do and see and build and think and experience in multiple ways. I can approach music from notes on a page. I can approach music from hearing a recording. I can color code the way different tones feel to me and take those colors and start looking for patterns and build something that, to me, I can then explain. This is the Gettysburg Address. I know what you're originally seeing here is just a wash of different reds and blues and grays. Let me explain what this means to me. My way in was through how hearing the Gettysburg Address first made me feel. For someone else, it might be creating some kind of mathematical algorithm or building something in Minecraft that I can then turn around and explain. Here's my understanding of the Gettysburg Address by what I've built here in Minecraft. It's that three-dimensionality and that affective, the emotional value by building communities where different pockets of individuals find where they have those commonalities and how they can exploit them and integrate them into these different areas. The technology tools give us those opportunities. Too often, we sit back, unless you are a giant nerd, and I am raising my hand with pride, who is, instruction booklet, rip, rip, rip. Let's blow this thing up and see what all happens. So many EdTech advances came from people like us, teachers, who had no funds. They would go home after school and they would think, I've got this one kid I can't seem to reach. On my own computer, I've got this one crazy roller coaster program. I wonder if I would, and they do something completely antithetical to the way it was presented. And they let the learner have the opportunity to find their own voice through a different experience, still getting the same core content, just in a different way. I'll give you one last example. When I was in second grade and we were supposed to learn subtraction, I remember this so well. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast today, but I remember this. The teacher would turn her back to us and cover the board with her body while she was doing the math problem. Then she would turn around and show us the subtraction problem with the answer and say, now let me explain to you how I got this. And one day we said, why won't you let us watch you doing the problem? Why do you always do it and then tell us about it? She said, because I was taught to do subtraction differently than I'm supposed to teach it to you. And my little second grade head exploded. There's more than one way to do subtraction? What is this madness? And that, to me, is what technology affords. That open opportunity to recognize there's more than one way to solve a problem, to approach learning. Because going back to your thing, focusing on how do we bring more people of diversity in? There's more than one way to learn. Why does everyone have to learn the same way? If we can agree on a canon of abilities that need to be demonstrated in an appropriate fashion. Hello, Finland. If we can agree on what it means to be able to have a certain understanding and ability, why does it have to be that there is only one way to demonstrate it? When we understand out in the real world, replication doesn't make you innovative or successful. You may survive, but it doesn't afford you to thrive. I truly believe if we weren't so worried about losing control, if we had more faith in our desire to empower people to be the best they can be, rather than got to make sure everybody looks like me, talks like me, sounds like me, I really believe it would afford these opportunities for more people who don't look like their third grade teacher to be interested in the profession, because they would feel that they are needed. They would feel how valued they are. But when you're negated, why would you fight that fight? When in, media, teachers, they're the problem, everything from toe fungus to global warming, right? Not so much. And the C&I piece of that is parallel. Schools that afford more project-based learning, more guidance, more mentoring, those are the schools where children of all shapes, sizes, fashions, flavors, and teachers of the same ilk, they thrive together. And they're moving forward. There's big picture schools out east. There's so many pockets where this is happening. But then what happens? A school board panics because they feel they're losing control. And instead of taking the time to learn what's really going on, why is that working, they go back to that line from Star Wars, the more you try and tighten your grip, the more the star systems will slip through your fingers. I told you I'm a nerd. So, I honestly believe if we looked at the EdTech not as another way of regulating and just replicating faster and cheaper, because that's not what education is, but as greater tools to enhance personal expression and the learning through those means. Yeah, you got to have your standards, but the standards need to be about demonstrating the mastery, not the replication of the same content over and over.
This has been a fascinating conversation, Dr. K. I just want to thank you for taking time out of what I know is a busy schedule to share your insights with our listeners. Fascinating work, fascinating conversation. I just want to thank you again for taking some time to speak with us. Appreciate you very much.
I have to say, this has been a lovely conversation, and I genuinely appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. So thank you.
All right, Dr. K. Thank you so much. Take care. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.